Hello everyone, I'm Nicola Rowe, PPA's Director of Membership. Thanks very much for tuning into today's webinar, which is brought to us by PPA Associate Member PCS, so thanks very much to them. So today's all about the very topical issue of templated workflows and how these can benefit creativity, control and remote working. And we've got two really excellent speakers for you. We have Sean Briggs from Creative Workflows, who has a wealth of knowledge and experience, not least from his 20 years at Hearst, where he was responsible for guiding their strategy and developing publishing solutions and editorial systems. And we also have Martin Wright, who has been editor of the Shropshire Star since 2013. So as we go along, just a quick reminder that you can email in any questions, and then we'll take these at the end. And without further ado, Sean, over to you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just plough in and get things over because I think it's Martin that's got the most interesting bits to say. Hello everyone. I'm Sean Briggs. I have spent a couple of decades moving publishers' workflows forward through use of innovative technology and cultural change. It's still a big part of what I do. I think it's true to say that change has been and continues to be the norm, yet it still elicits fear and anxiety in most editorial teams. This shouldn't and needn't be the case. Take templates, for example. We've had templates for publication since the very start of periodical publishing. I'm old enough to remember pre-printed page templates with 2, 3, 4 column grids onto which layout artists pasted drawings of images and mock copy ready to be sent to the typesetters. Those rigid templates were the mainstay of all magazines through to the birth of desktop publishing in the early 1980s. A software like Alder's PageMaker started to free up the design of pages. But it was really with the introduction of Quark Express in the late 80s where the rigid template started to be relaxed and the innovations grew, with people like Neville Brody and his work on the face, leading to a renaissance of style in magazine production. Following Quark's stagnation in the 90s, Adobe took up the mantle and introduced InDesign, with more freedom from the drudgery of manual hyphenation and justification, along with the introduction of one-click features like drop shadows and vignettes and transparency. In versions since then, Adobe have steadily added to InDesign. The word spacing and character spacing continue to improve. The introduction of page snippets and object libraries all enhance the use of templates, speeding up design and layouts. Which pretty much gets us to where we are now. Templates continue to be used by art teams, but generally in a very unstructured way. Time and again, I see designers starting a template from scratch, wasting time and effort in reproducing what's been done many times before. The flip side of that, I've seen publications with so many templates, freelance staff have no idea which template to use on which feature, and again, this wastes time and effort. Where content libraries do exist, people often neglect them, and the use of snippets is even rarer. This does mean there is great flexibility in the design, but again, time is being spent redesigning what's probably been created many times before. There is little discretion between pages that demand a thoughtful and innovative design and standard repetitive pages like the Ed's letter or horoscope pages. The same effort is being applied irrespective of page importance or urgency. So to the future. The potential is to get the technology to do the mundane and repetitive tasks, the management of what content sits on what grid. In this world, the images are preloaded and ready. Text styles and paragraph styles can be applied automatically. Pagination and flat plan positions are managed centrally, with greater visibility to all. It becomes entirely feasible that some standard pages are fully populated, laid out and styled automatically, with designers adding the final flair and finesse. Now the goal here is to free up time, to focus on those pages where innovation and high design are required. In other words, to do the things the machines can't do. In a publishing world under increasing financial pressure and ever-decreasing staff numbers, the current focus has been on turnaround, getting the content out in front of the audience. Creativity and innovation are no longer the norm. Editorial staff barely have time to get pages to press before the cycle starts again. By moving to a more automated, a more augmented way of working, it's possible to give back time to the creative process, to give designers and writers time to think, and in turn produce higher quality products, making teams and hopefully audiences happier. I'd like to hand over to Martin Wright, editor of the Shropshire Star, who's already well on that journey, getting systems to work for him and his staff. I think newspapers have been more open to innovation in the past, and there is plenty that magazines can learn from them. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Martin Wright, editor of the Shropshire Star, which is a 3-edition daily newspaper. Our circulation is just over 26,000 copies a day. But also within the Shropshire Star portfolio, we produce 8 weekly newspapers, we produce a monthly glossy magazine, and we produce various periodicals as well. So, as Sean said, we started the sort of templating journey back in January 2015. So we are well on the way now, and I think one of the starting points for me is that I've been the editor of a newspaper in various roles over the past 15 years, and during that time there has been an increasing pressure on newspaper publishers to make savings. The difficulties that our industry is facing are well known. So obviously what we've been trying to do is to come up with new workflows that allow us to maintain the quality, but also to save money as well. Which takes us on to the first part of the presentation today, which is why change. Obviously, the main driving force for us was to create a more efficient workflow. Essentially, when I took over as editor of the Shropshire Star 4 years ago, producing pages was incredibly labour intensive. You had a team of news desk, content managers, if you like, on there. You had then designers, and then you had the sub-editors as well who were going through the copy. Now, that meant that you had an awful lot of people dedicated to drawing up pages, and the question for me was, is that the best use of a increasingly under pressure editorial budget? So this need to look at how we did things in a different way made us reconsider really how we broke up that budget. The main thing for me as the editor was to try and ensure that we protected our frontline journalists, because for me the most important thing about our publications was local newspapers, local stories. We wanted to make sure that our USP was intact. So for me, when we came to look at our workflow, the emphasis had to be on the content rather than the process. And this was a very big step for us, and I think it's fair to say that it was not something that we entered into lightly, because there was a huge amount of nervousness about moving from essentially drawing up every page by hand to a system whereby we would be going down a pretty much entirely templated route. So the challenges that we faced back in January 2015 when we switched systems, one of the main questions for me and also for the senior editorial team at the Star was, how do we retain creativity in a template-driven workflow? With that, and as Sean has already made reference to in his presentation, we really had to recognise the reality. Although we were drawing up every page from scratch, actually, if you looked at our pages day to day, they looked pretty much identical. There would be the odd showpiece page that we would do differently, but most pages looked very similar. So in effect, we're templating those pages anyway. Moving to a templated system, it is now easier for us to pick those showpiece pages that go beyond our templates to make them more attractive, because where we save time in filling the templated pages elsewhere in the paper, the showpiece pages, we're able to dedicate more resource to making those look more impressive for our readers. The key thing for me, above all else, was that we wanted to ensure that readers didn't notice the difference. I didn't want phone calls from people saying, your paper looks a mess, or there's bits missing, whatever it might be. So the key for me was that templates had to be functional, but they also had to allow us to make the changes to our workflow without it being obvious to the readers. The other goals for me were having access to a real-time view of the publication so that I could see editorial and adverts all together and allow remote access to knowledge. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So how did we do it? Well, we needed to change the skill sets of our news editors, our designers, and our subs. In effect, we merged those three areas to create a team of content managers. And as you can imagine, that team is much smaller than the previous separation of labour between news editors, designers, and subs. So we've got now a team where they are multi-skilled and they can all do a bit of everything as required. So content managers, as they now are on our news desk, can select templates, they can drop copy on pages, and they can sub the copy as required. Key to getting that mix right, though, is retaining the design skills so that we still have a couple of people who have more advanced InDesign training, because InDesign is the tool that we use, that have more advanced InDesign training than some of the other content managers, so that we can do the outstanding front pages, the templates inside, and so on. What we also did was create a wide variety of templates to ensure page production was as slick as possible. And obviously, that's the key thing with templates is having a variety so that you can plan for any eventuality editorially. So what were the benefits for us? Well, it's changed the way we plan the paper. We do have this real-time view of the publication, and we also have access to every single page in the publication. So once we've dropped a template on a page, we can then place stories based entirely upon their merit, rather than being driven by the production momentum, if you like. Because previously, we would have maybe 30 pages to fill each day editorially, and the way it would work is the chief sub would start working from the back towards the front, and there would be a pressure on the news desk to fill each page working towards page 1. What that meant in practice was that good stories were maybe placed on page 30 because the chief sub wanted to get page 30 finished and sent. Because we now operate on templates, we can drop content on any page that we see fit based entirely upon its merit. So that's been quite a big change in the way we plan the paper, and I think it's benefited the end product quite substantially. We're able to work in advance on pages much more effectively than we were able to previously. All you need is to drop a template on the date of the publication that you want to work on, and you can get started. Again, that's made a huge difference when we come to working ahead on weekend publications or monthly publications. We can just get started much more easily than we were able to previously. Resilience in emergencies. We can create and edit pages from anywhere with an internet connection. You don't need InDesign, you just need to be able to access our knowledge browser. You can drop a template on and you can then fill it. We use this regularly. Last night at about 10 to 10 last night we had a story break, and I was able just to jump upstairs on the computer, and I was able to change the story, write the headline and resend it to the press within a couple of minutes. And we've done that on several occasions. We've been able to work sort of midnight and later when news has broken, so that we've been able to put out the very latest for our readers the next morning. And that's been a huge benefit for us. One of the other major benefits has been the instant article sharing with our sister publications, the weekly titles that I mentioned at the outset. They're able to access all the content, so the words and pictures that we use in the daily paper. They can take the packages that we drop onto our templates and drag them onto their templates. If their templates are different and they allow for more words, they can use any elements of the package that didn't appear in the original story in the daily newspaper. It's massively improved the quality of those papers. It's incredibly quick. It's as simple as dragging content from one box to another. And on that subject, speed, the speed with which we can put together pages using these templates is pretty extraordinary. compared to the labour-intensive system that we had previously. We can now simply drag and drop content in minutes if necessary. And probably the best example of that was we delayed the printing of the paper for the referendum results in June. We started printing with the first edition, including the results of the Brexit vote, and then David Cameron resigned at sort of about 8:15. By 8:25, we had a new version of the Shropshire Star on the press running, and so that was in the shops literally minutes later. It is simply as easy as dragging and dropping content to update. There have also been some benefits commercially for us as well. We have a real-time view, which means no advert clashes, so we can see if an advert changes size, if it hasn't dropped in. Previously, we wouldn't have been able to see that live, so that's been quite a big change for us. Templates allow our commercial teams to sell advertising features or commercial content with more confidence. They know exactly what it's going to look like, so they can take examples out with them. It's a very flexible system. I mentioned then about the speed with which we can drop stories on pages. The same is true of content that needs to be placed alongside adverts. And that is obviously hugely beneficial in an industry which is under pressure, and there we have our commercial teams going right up to the wire when they're selling adverts. And I've mentioned again, better planning. We are able to get further ahead with features than ever, and that again means that we are better prepared and better organised and able to do it more efficiently. Just briefly, the areas that we are looking at developing next, we want the ability to manage website content from within the knowledge browser. That will be coming in the next couple of weeks, actually. So we will be able to, from within that knowledge system, move content around on our website. We can change priorities, we can update content, and that will also be fed back into the print content as well. So we want to make the knowledge system more inclusive, so it's properly a management tool for both digital and print. And of course, we will continue to focus on getting the content right and protecting our USP, which is local news. And of course, we'll also be looking at ways we can make the workflow more efficient as we move forward. So there are priorities for what's next. And with that, I think I'll hand back to Nicola, who is going to pass on her questions.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Martin and Sean too. Lots of interesting practical stuff in there. So we've had some questions through. So I'm going to start with one around the cultural challenges. So obviously you touched on the fact that you had to do some shifting around of teams and things. So how did you manage that whole kind of cultural shift?
Well, it's not easy, and obviously there was, particularly amongst our design and subbing teams, there was a great deal of concern about what this would mean for them. What we tried to do, as far as possible, because obviously you probably appreciate that this was quite tricky in terms of redundancies and so on, we tried to get people on board to show them what we would be able to achieve by using the templated system. And I think it's fair to say that once we were able to demonstrate how the templates worked and that they didn't necessarily mean an end to creativity, I think once we got that over to people, we were able to demonstrate just how much more efficient the templating system was. In a very sort of practical way, one of the great benefits for us was that previously, editorially, we were pretty poor at sticking to our hours, and particularly subs and designers would be staying late to get things finished later on into the evening beyond when their shift should have ended. Templates have really helped us to make our staff more disciplined with sticking to their hours, because we're able to do things much more quickly than we were previously, even though we have a smaller number of people. We're able to get things done more quickly so that people are leaving on time. So once we got over that initial concern and obvious sort of mistrust of this taking away creativity, which hasn't really proven to be the case, we were able to sort of demonstrate some of the benefits, and since then I think it's been pretty positive.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure the designers and subs would see that as a return on their investment. But we've also had a question around, the sort of very hard-edged ROI. So how has that been achieved? Is it through just the cost savings?
Yeah, mainly the cost savings, but again, some of the commercial benefits have helped with that. So we are able to do things a bit more effectively with our commercial teams, and that's helped us to perhaps sell a few new supplements and features that maybe we were finding a bit more difficult previously. But obviously the bulk of this has been savings in numbers. I mentioned that to begin with we had a news desk, we had a separate subs desk, we had a separate team of designers. We've obviously shrunk that down by going to this templated system, and that's been a significant saving for our editorial budget, and it has allowed us to retain the number of frontline journalists, which, as I said at the outset, was one of my key goals within this.
Okay, thank you. Someone else has asked, what are the key technical challenges that you've faced?
Well, I think a lot of it just came down to reskilling the people that we had. So we had to teach them how to make templates effectively, because one of the areas that you have to get right with templates is making sure that all the boxes are linked up so that when you drop a piece of content onto that template, it can recognize what's the body text, what's the headline, what's the byline, what's the picture, what's the caption, and so on. So we had to train people carefully in that area. And I'll be honest, there were a few hiccups along the way with that, but we got there. And other than that, it was just basically multi-skilling the people that were doing different jobs. So we've taken news editors and we've given them InDesign skills. We've shown them how to use templates, and we've given them subbing skills. And that's been the same for those three disciplines. We've taken people and we've broadened their skill set so that they, instead of just being a designer, they're a sub and they're a news editor as well. We've sort of combined their skill sets. So it's mainly been around training and coaching.
I think the other thing, Nicole, if I can just add here, is because I've taken quite a lot of magazines into a templated environment, and it becomes true that each individual magazine goes through this process, and with a monthly magazine, it takes about 3 months for them to settle into the new workflow. But once they've got used to that workflow, once they've got used to the advantages of that workflow and how it can free up their time, there's no going back. I've talked to those editorial teams who've then gone to non-templated environments, and the first thing they ask for is, can we have the templates? Initially it's frightening and it feels quite alien, but then quickly it becomes the natural way of working, and they don't want to go back to the old way of manually having to do the tasks.
Okay. I mean, there's an interesting question actually around sort of how do you ensure that, so obviously there are all the benefits that you've already outlined, but how do you ensure that you retain the individuality of publication, and you don't get that sort of identikit feel?
If I can answer that, I think it's about the way you design the templates in the first place. So your templates can retain all the characteristics of your individual publication. So I mentioned that we produce a range of, we've got the daily newspaper, 8 weeklies, a monthly glossy magazine. They all look entirely different because all their templates are different. So that's the key thing. And as I say, you can pick as many pages within those publications as you like to draw up freehand. And obviously that will be a balance. I mean, for us, we needed to make the savings, so we had to make an efficient workflow, which means that we keep the pages that aren't templated to a minimum. But obviously there's nothing to stop you saying, well, we're going to have 50% of our publication templated and 50% drawn up freehand, if that's the way you wanted to go to retain your creativity. I think the reality is for most publications, they do follow a template of sorts, even if it's not a template that they drag and drop onto a page. Most publications will look very similar month to month. I think the key to retaining the individuality is getting those templates right at the outset.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you.
Nicole,
sorry, Sean, yeah.
What I was saying in my brief intro was people are so focused on trying to get the pages out, and they take an arbitrary approach. They don't focus on those pages that need the best design. And I think templating, you can drag and drop the standard pages, like, for example, the horoscope pages, where it's pretty formulaic. It follows month after month, so that can be laid out incredibly quickly through drag and drop. But then you might want to spend more time on a fashion feature. And I think templating allows that. You can choose those pages which need a lot of human intervention and those pages that don't.
Okay, excellent. Well, I think we've got time for one more question. This is one for you, Martin. With hindsight being such a wonderful thing, if there was one thing that you might have handled differently, what would that have been if you could sort of have your time over again? Is there anything, any lessons that you learned that maybe you'd do things differently next time?
I think we would probably spend a bit more time on testing the templates before we went over to the templated system, because what we found initially was that we hadn't set them up properly. In some cases, so you would drop a story on, and the pictures maybe that were supposed to be associated with that story, they wouldn't drop in, and we had to go and find those pictures and drag them in. It took us a period of several months probably to weed out the problem templates and to get that working properly. If I had my time again, I would ensure that the templates had been more rigorously tested before we went live, so that we stopped those little faults. Because I think, obviously, from my point of view, the main thing was I wanted this system to work smoothly, and I wanted people to see the benefits of it. And those sort of little niggles, they do undermine it. So I think if I could do something differently, that would be it. Test those templates a bit more rigorously.
Excellent. That sounds like really, really sound advice. Well, thanks very much, both to Martin and to Sean. Just to let everyone know that there'll be a recording available on both the PPA and the PCS websites. And if you have any other questions, you can follow up with PCS, and there'll be links provided on the follow-up email. So thanks to everyone who has tuned in, and thanks again to our speakers. Bye-bye.